Good to see everybody. So this session is really, Colm's going to drive the bus on this and sort of take us from where rugby has come from to things that are happening today. And I know that a number of you are scholars of rugby, but also involved and active in the game and keeping it moving forward. I know Erika and Robert Buchanan, with the work he's done in Wisconsin, have been heavily involved in trying to promote success of the game. So Colm, over to you, and looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Thank you very much, John. And I'd just like to begin by praising you for putting on the players first, and they have provided a brilliant hors d'oeuvre and warm-up and have given some ideas and concepts that I was looking to develop in today's session that we've got now. So I think it would be appropriate if we zipped round for a minute each just to tell the world about us. I went to arguably one of the greatest rugby schools in Ireland, Blackrock College, home of Fergus Slattery, Brian O'Driscoll, Hugo McNeil, Brendan Mullen, Luke Fitzgerald, Leo Cullen. I was with them all. And the difference between me and them was they listened to the rugby coaches and became Irish international players. And I might have listened, but I didn't really sort of pick it up as well. So my career was more off the pitch than on it. But I'm a lecturer now at Solent University in Southampton. So, and I live very near Chris Little because my house is in Hanwell, which is not too far from Twickenham, which is where St. Mary's College is. So over to you, Chuck, and 30 seconds about yourself.
Thanks very much, Colm. Yes, I'm Chuck Little. So originally from New Zealand. I grew up in New Zealand. Didn't play rugby as a youngster. I came from a family, my father was a soccer player, so soccer family. But again, high school, I went to an all-boys high school where rugby was the thing and really got into rugby. So never played. I refereed for a few years during when I was my late teens, early 20s. But so I got into sports history, and actually with John Norright was one of my first lecturers at the University of Otago. Really got me into sports history. So history of the rugby codes, particularly rugby league actually, and particularly rugby league in Australia, the South Sydney Rabbitohs. But obviously coming from New Zealand, rugby union's really, really important. So I've always, an interest in that and its place in New Zealand society.
Lovely. And Derek, over to you.
Yeah, I'm a historian in the United States. My rugby career was brief and not particularly brilliant. I had never seen a live rugby match in my life. The first live rugby match I ever saw was starting at the right wing for Rhodes University in South Africa, the only time I've ever been right wing in my life. The first live match I ever saw, within 1 minute, I had the ball in King Williamstown in the Eastern Cape. And within 7 seconds after getting the ball, I was a sprawled out mess on the pitch, and a bit of a love affair began. I'd run track in college. I'd been an athlete, but rugby just wasn't on my radar. I played American football. But the other thing that I saw at liberal Rhodes University was an underlying current of some of the racial issues, even then in 1997. And from that point on, because I cared about sport as part of the work I do on race and politics in the US and Southern Africa, I started looking more closely at sport, and particularly rugby and a few others, wearing sometimes a journalist's hat, sometimes a historian's hat. The previous panel had this sort of back and forth between forwards and back row. All I can say, guys like me, all I can say is the reason I played wing is because it's the place where someone who doesn't know the game at all can do the least amount of damage. So that's how I became a wing.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And Robert, you're muted, Robert.
Hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, excuse me. I played club rugby at the highest level in Wisconsin and select side in the 70s and 80s. So, but you would never have heard of me in my playing exploits. In 1983, I actually ended up in New Zealand for the British Lions tour. I met John Sinclair. He was the co-founder of the New Zealand Rugby Museum. He stuck his finger in my chest and said, who's going to preserve the origin of rugby and sports history in the United States? If it's not you. That brought me back to the United States and started a 50-year passion project. But my background is actually professionally in regional design, multi-purpose facility development. So I have a lot of years working in public education and in the public sector, trying to help communities develop facilities that serve their needs in a way where they usually show up with no money and with a great vision, and they need a lot of help in how to bring in the professional skills to accomplish their dream.
Thank you for that. And Erika, I know a little bit about Tony Collins's unspectacular rugby career because I've read it in his book. And you, thankfully, are the only person on this panel who's played rugby to any significant event. So at least we've got someone who can say, I've been there and done that. So perhaps you could spend a few seconds telling us about your career on the pitch as well as off the pitch.
Thank you so much for this role of the rugby player of the team, but I really believe that without the people outside the pitch, we could not play. So without you, we could not arrive at the same level that we arrive right now. So I'm a concrete visionary rugby player. I played 21 years, 2 World Cups, 7 European Cups, 20 years of played rugby in Italy. It's a lot. I'm like the dinosaur of the female rugby of Italy. That is not really nice to say, but it's the reality. And so I know perfectly all the different eras and how to survive. And after I finished playing at my 40, and I began to manage, and I began before a regional manager, and then I was elected in the Italian member of the board. And that was a super master in resilience, because what's going on the pitch is completely different from what's going on behind the scene. And so you have to match the reality with the politics. Obviously, I could not say it outside in the same way, but you really have the perception how you make things works. And I'm really passionate about women's rugby and grassroots. I don't care about the high levels, because without the base, forget the height. So I'm really focused on trying to make understand Italian people that we are not the rude, violent people that all the stereotype describes. And so
we'll be exploring those points as we go on, Erika. Thank you very much. And finally, Tony, and there's a reason I put you last. You'll find out why in a second. So over to you, mate.
Thanks. Yeah, as you hinted at, Colm, my rugby career was short and spectacularly unspectacular, which is why I became a historian. So yeah, I'm Tony Collins, Emeritus Professor of History at Montfort University. I also do some teaching at the Institute of Sports Humanities at the University of Buckinghamshire on the Sports Leadership Masters course. I'm kind of like Chuck, I'm a dual coder in that I've also spent a lot of time watching and researching rugby league. But for me, I think the important thing is that the two codes of rugby are, although quite often they don't come into contact with each other, they still have an indissoluble bond because of their common roots. And so that's what's led me to look at the histories of both games in a number of books, and then do the book that Colm was referring to, The Oval World, which is a global history of all the forms of rugby. And I think one of the important things that, as we look to the future of rugby, that it's important to bear in mind is that it does come from a family of the football codes, and that whilst they appear to be very different today, rugby union, rugby league, American football, even Aussie rules are linked together by the elements of their birth. And that's one of the things that interests me, and also soccer as well to some extent. And that's one of the things that interests me. And I think, you know, to use the old cliche, it's only by looking at the past that we can really make a useful guess at what's going to happen in the future.
Well, thank you for that. And Tony has slipped me some money electronically, some bitcoins, to advertise his book, The Rugby Great Split. This is about rugby football and rugby league, the split, and his other bestsellers, available at all good bookshops and many bad bookshops as well.
It's mainly bad, yeah.
Globe, right? Now, the reason I said that is because, do you remember what you wrote on page 502 of the Oval World, Tony?
If you'd have said 501, I would have been fine, but it's just gone a little bit way past me. Yeah.
So, as a good historian, let's all start with the end at the beginning. And this is what you wrote. You said that since it emerged in the middle of the 19th century, rugby has been many things: a tool of educationalists, an instrument of governments, and a plaything of adventurers. It has been used to promote the best in humanity and to support the worst. It has encompassed all human emotion, noble and otherwise. For countless numbers of people, it helps them make sense of the world and sometimes of life itself. I think that's a really wonderful summary of what rugby is. And from that, I want to take us to three ideas and three themes I want us to explore. And they are class, culture, and purpose. So when we talk about, and I'll be asking different people on those issues. So for class, I want to think about, and I'm going to start with you, Tony, who played rugby? Why did they play rugby? And to what extent, historically, has rugby been a game of inclusion or separation or class distinction? Right? So then I've got a few other little questions lined up for a couple of other people as well on this issue. So Tony, just very briefly, what I want to know from you is the people who played rugby, could we say globally, with broad brushstrokes, and there may be caveats, that essentially the type of people who played it, we're talking about rugby union, came from the same class? Would that be broadly true, or would that contain too many inaccuracies?
That's a great question. And I think when rugby first started, because it came out of the English private schools, known as public schools for a variety of typically British reasons, then yes, it was. It was a game that was intended for the sons. It was a male-only sport at the beginning. It was intended for the sons of the upper and middle classes who were privately educated, who had the advantages of life. But one of the things about rugby, and the other sports, but I think it's particularly true in rugby, is that it rapidly spread throughout all classes. And so you can see in Britain, in South Wales, in the north of England, in southwest of England, it became the game for everyone. And I think that was true in Australia, it's true in New Zealand, less so in South Africa because of the way in which the races were divided and deliberately segregated in South Africa. But that spreading out to all sections of society occurred in a British society, in societies that were shaped by Britain, in the British Empire, to some extent America. But because it was Britain, and Britain is, and probably always will be obsessed with class, the game started to fracture along class lines. And because that British society was replicated in Australia and New Zealand, which saw themselves as British-style societies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that same process of division and fracture and split took place around the English-speaking world where rugby was played, which led to the situation we have now, where you have the two codes that are played in England, Australia, and New Zealand and France as well, but that's slightly different. So it was a game. It became a game for all classes, and it should have remained a game for all classes. But the social and political pressures of British society and the British Empire caused it to fracture along class lines.
It's very, very interesting. So if I get you right, it started the elite private schools, it became more democratic, but because the class distinctions inherent in the British imperial structure, it sort of fractured again. Would that be right, John? Yeah. So Erika,
yeah.
What about Italy? Is rugby a middle class game? Is it a classless game? Is it an aristocratic game?
It's a classless game. So we don't have, it's not so known game nowadays. It's more known because obviously thanks to the Six Nations and the broadcasting in television, there are more people that know what rugby is. But in some area, you know that Italy is long and more than 800 miles. So it's really different. The knowledge that people's got in the north, Veneto and Lombardia, for example, they are the region of rugby, but going toward the south, lots of people doesn't know either now what rugby is. But I really would like to make a connection of what was rugby once, because lots of people know that there are two different theory about how rugby born, and we really speak often about harpastum. That was the game that before the Greek and then the Romans play on the border. So speaking about inclusion, the Romans play against the population that they were watching and controlling. This game that seems to be really similar to rugby. And so for us, when we speak about rugby and inclusion, it works a lot. It begins to speak about these characteristics a lot of time ago.
That's lovely. And Robert, what about America? Because you you own all of the documents of American history in your house. So what was the development of rugby there? All right. Was that on class lines or was it democratic?
I think a lot of times people don't understand that in the 19th century, the person who had the biggest influence on the development of public schools in America was Dr. Thomas Arnold. So even 20 years ago, I was teaching in a school that was organized exactly like rugby school. And so America is based on education for the second son, you know, not the person who's going to inherit dad or mom's business. People had to go out, get a good education, work hard, become a leader in their profession, give back to their community. So the class part would be who had access to education. So in the 19th century, it did spread in the communities. We had community-based rugby played all over. There was the first rugby game in my community was in 1880, but it took place at the university. Shout out to you. So I was the person in charge of hosting Black Rock College in 1978. So yeah, I've been in that part of the sport. So I would say even today, the hardest thing for us is how do people enter the sport if it's not through the school? And that inherently has a little bit of class restriction that Americans don't want to admit.
Thank you for that. And I want to just push it on, and we're going to go to Chuck and then to Derek, and you can take these 2 points in one if you like, Chuck. You can talk about the classlessness of rugby, if that is the case in New Zealand historically. But I want to ask you to think about what did it mean in terms of cultural identity? What did playing rugby mean as a nation to New Zealanders? Can you just explore that in 30 seconds?
Yeah, so not an easy task in 30 seconds, but yes, I'd probably pick up that second point about what it means. I think the real thing in terms of where rugby still is in New Zealand is become so entrenched in New Zealand identity, particularly the success of the 1905 All Blacks, you know, that this is the, you know, a New Zealand team going to Britain, the mother country, which, you know, that was still what my grandmother born in New Zealand, you know, and that's what she called her. but to go back and to show where equals and better. I think that's really important, that from that day, that linked in, that, I think was, a lot, there's a lot of myths around New Zealand rugby, but I think that had a really big part in it, that in national identity, that this was something we were good at. The small little New Zealand, punching above our weight, and that has a lot of value in New Zealand. To move on to classlessness, I think in a rugby context, New Zealand rugby benefits from that lack of being less class restricted than other societies. I don't, again, there's a lot more myth in that, but certainly, actually the education system, although it's based on the British public school model, the real strength of rugby is high school rugby, school rugby, but not just in fee-paying schools. It's the best, particularly the big boys' high schools in the major town. Rugby becomes so important in that, and rugby kind of gets, in terms of looking at why New Zealand is so strong in rugby, rugby gets captured in those schools is really important. We don't get rugby leagues there to a small extent. Football becomes really the working class sport in New Zealand. I'd say association football, in the technical high schools, which tend to have a more working class audience. But yes, there is a lot more class because it's so important for national identity. National identity sort of trumps issues of class to some extent. And there are social differences. That is perhaps a slightly more classless society than some other places where rugby's played.
And I don't know if Marcus Horan or any of the other Irish players are listening to this, but I'd kind of say that in Ireland, if you asked Ireland which country do you want to beat at rugby, it would be England, more so than anybody else. In New Zealand, which is the country that you would most want to beat? Would it be Australia? Would it be South Africa? Would it be England?
I think initially in those early years, it was England. And then particularly in the 1960s, that was kind of pushed aside, and we'd done that. And then I think it's really moved to South Africa, and that was not a social clash, but simply they were our great right. Who was the best rugby team? It's the All Blacks or the Springboks. So that became really important. Australia, for a lot of history, was kind of, fairly irrelevant to New Zealand. We played them, but they weren't that good. And it's only kind of really the 1980s, 1990s that the Australian, the Bledisloe Cup becomes more important, that Australia becomes very competitive then. But it would be South Africa was the great rival, and that was very much a sporting rivalry because they were the only side that was most likely to beat us. So that was a real contest for who was the best.
Well, that brings us brilliantly into Derek, right? You've been in America, you've been in South Africa, you've seen that, and what did you pick up about the notions of identity? Because you also talked about being on the right wing and being a left winger, politically. How did the experience of rugby in probably an apartheid era when you were there make you feel, develop? Is it better now than it was?
Yeah, so I mean, the big issue about South Africa is that the answer to all these questions is yes. And what I mean by that is, was South African rugby classless for white people? It theoretically was. That's why you get this dominance of Afrikaner farm boys. On the other hand, there's never been a greater affirmative action program in global history than the elite schools in South Africa finding these farm boys who can play rugby. There are 10 schools that have produced about 25% of all Springboks. And so in that sense, there was still an elite pathway that gave a lot of kids an opportunity, whether they were good rugby players or not, because they were just good enough, but also because of the stratified sort of structure of South African education more broadly. It was a world where white South Africans got enormous privilege, even if they wouldn't have been perceived to have been especially privileged. And then the entire racial aspect that includes some 75 to 80% of the population obviously plays in. Now, Black and colored South Africans always played rugby. The idea that blacks are not rugby people is the thing I heard all the time in the early post-apartheid years when I first got there. That is completely untrue. They're just simply excluded from the structures that would allow them to play elite rugby. So at the time, it would have been provincial rugby, as well as, of course, a pathway through the Springboks. So I mean, in that sense, the changes have been spectacular, but it's telling that as inspiring as Siya Kolisi's story is, he got pulled into the elite schools. almost all of the Black Springboks that have reached any kind of level got pulled into these elite schools. So what does that say for township rugby in Port Elizabeth or in Cape Town or wherever? Well, it still says that there's a pathway through this, and it is going to involve getting into one of these elite schools. So you're identified at a young age. So you got to have some kind of attribute.
So what we've got, if I understand you correctly, that in South Africa, be you black or white, you've got to be in an elite school to play South African rugby. That's the reality of it. In America, you're most likely to have been in elite schools to have played rugby. Well, in Ireland, you're most likely to have been in the elite schools. In England, most of the English players come from public schools, and probably a similar number in percentage in Australia and perhaps in New Zealand. So class seems to be a big issue still. Would that, am I getting nods from people on that one?
Perhaps to extent this, again, New Zealand's quite similar to South Africa in terms of, there have been rugby pathways. If you were good at rugby, you would gravitate either yourself or more likely be pulled into some of the, the leading boys' school. Inter-school rugby is a big deal, like I think it is in South Africa. It's probably for American or sort of high school football in Texas. So these schools, winning rugby is really important. So the university, my high school would recruit good, country boys would be brought in to stay in the hostel.
Yeah.
You would to get in. Then John's made the comment about to get into the University of Otago. If you were a good rugby player, you could get brought into the University of Otago. So there was very much, I think, professionalism, I think, in New Zealand, not perhaps in the paying of players, but in treating this as a serious business. And certainly the high schools are recruiting, no longer just in New Zealand, they're recruiting players throughout the Pacific Islands, at high to play not for provincial teams, but to play for high schools.
That's very interesting. So what we've got to finish at 5:02, so that gives us 15 minutes. I want to do about another 5 or 6 minutes on the last of the three themes, and then bring us up from 25 years in five minutes. We'll do that. But what I want to talk about, when we were talking and listening to Chris Patterson, and he was talking about culture and identity, the magic of rugby. He didn't want the micro traditions to be lost in the professional game. And that was something that was echoed by all of the players in the first panel. So that leads me on to thinking about, the culture. What is the purpose? Is rugby, has it changed from pleasure to profit or proselytism? Is it any of those words suitable? Is rugby now in the modern professional era just about profit? Has rugby changed from proselytism to pleasure or from pleasure to proselytism? Are those words relevant as we move towards 1995? So who would like to kick off on that one? It's a free hit. And I want to talk about women's rugby as well.
I can take a shot at it. So for us, we started investment philanthropy, Ethos of Rugby, for that exact reason. Yeah. And part of that is we deal with the end user, with the parent. The parent is the one who decides whether their child, son or daughter is going to play rugby. And you have to give them reasons why we're a reason to consider us a sport different than other American sports. We're a minority sport. So we decided we really needed to start teaching the historical ethics of rugby to the leaders of clubs and our union, because they don't really have a strong background. And we also saw, sort of a deterioration in our own clubs in Wisconsin. When the professional era came on, it trickled down to players saying the point is to have the best team. The idea of a club started to fade. And so rather than throw our hands up and give up, we spent a lot of time trying to teach the ethos of rugby to all the active players and to parents, and to do it in ways that motivate students to get involved, to get a good education, to be important in their community, to be respected. You know, the last little point, we brought our expertise to helping the community near our pitch develop the Miracle League baseball field for disabled children. You may think that has nothing to do with rugby, but it was the leadership knowledge in our community that was helping somebody else bring health and wellness to an underserved population. That does tremendous branding to our sport. And if you have a good club culture, you're going to have a winning club at the same time.
That's excellent. And I know, and I'm just going to give a shout out because I've done my research. You've got the Ethos of Rugby Endowment. You've got the Elizabeth Godfrey Memorial Referee Endowment Program and the Women's Rugby Leadership Endowment. I'll come on to you in a minute, Erika, about that, about rugby, because I know you're passionate and I've done some research on what you believe as well. So I'll come to you on that. But can we extrapolate from this idea of a moral purpose of rugby? Does it teach you leadership, teamwork, all of the things that people have said? Mangan, back to his theory of athleticism, the playing of games was morally good for you. Has that carried through in any way? Do we believe it globally? And if we do believe it, has it been sustained professionally? So is rugby, in quote, a good thing? And has professionalism stopped it from being a good thing, or has its goodness been preserved? Tony.
Thanks, a $64,000 question.
I know.
I'm going to take a bit of a contrarian approach to this, because I think that all sports believe that they offer something unique and different to society, that all sports believe they have a moral value. I mean, soccer calls itself the beautiful game, and you can read, you know, some quite wonderful pieces about what soccer can do for people. And I think, you know, cricket, the same, baseball, football in American terms. So I don't think rugby's unique in believing that it has a moral code that elevates the game above just simply chasing the ball around. And I think also when you look back on its history, then I think that would also call into question many of its claims to be morally superior to other sports. And, you know, clearly it's changed tremendously, especially over the past 26 years. So moving from amateurism, which was held to be the first principle of the game and was the reason why there was a split that created rugby league, has been abandoned, and rugby has become a very commercialized and very business-driven sport in a way that it wasn't before. So I think the idea that rugby or another sport, any other sport, has a unique moral code or has something unique to offer is it's something that all sports say about themselves in different ways, and that which leads you to think that, you know, sports need this. Every sport needs something to give it a purpose over and above simply, you know, getting out there on a Saturday afternoon and chasing a ball around. And I think that's, you know, that's why it's important to rugby that it believes that, because it helps sustain the sport and keeps it growing.
And Chuck, we've seen many, what's the right word? Many a New Zealand team being very focused on winning. And do those supposed soft values, whatever they are they part of New Zealand rugby, or is it all about, you know?
I was thinking about that, and I think, yes, from a New Zealand, you know, the purpose of rugby, it was to win. You know, whether that's at the national team, whether that's at high school, through the whole infrastructure of clubs, right from when you're very young. And I think that, you know, one of New Zealand's great strengths in rugby is, yeah, it's the dominant sport. It gets the best athletes from very young. But yeah, I mean, that goes right back to, you know, the 1905 All Blacks. They're very successful, but they're also very controversial. You know, the way they play, the tactics they use, and that's kind of dogged New Zealand rugby team, certainly in Britain. You know, in fact, you know, they don't. And as I do agree with Tony, you know, every sport claims that, you know, the benefits of playing it. But I think New Zealand, you know, perhaps didn't didn't even pay lip service to that, and that, you know, they were beyond the pale. You know, they might be the most famous team, but probably, you know, most people know, you know, I don't think there are a lot of people's second teams, particularly in Britain, you know, because, you know, they are, you know, the dirty All Blacks, you know, that's why they win, because so I'm not sure. And I say, going back to high school, you know, it was about winning, you know. So high school rugby is a big deal, you know, the whole school goes out to watch these big inter-school games, 500 kids doing a haka. You know, it's not about the lessons, you know, it's about who's the best, who's winning. And I think that's perhaps New Zealand's a bit different, at least, you know, that it acknowledges that, and that's the focus.
And over, right, we go from London to America, to Derek.
In the latest Rugby World magazine, the debate, they do this every single time, was, is it more important to win or the way you play? And the first person who answered it said, you know, is it more important to win? Yes, yes, and yes. And the second person was a New Zealander who said yes, but, which is a luxury New Zealand has, right? Because New Zealand can both play the best in the world and be the best team. Whereas look at the criticism South Africa got for the way they beat the Lions, even though they kind of handily beat the Lions when all was said and done. So there still is this idea of playing the game in a certain kind of way that in fact abandons itself in the 73rd minute when you're trailing by 1, right? So in other words, it's all great to have these ideals. Look, Brazil hasn't been Brazil in football for 20 years either, right? Because at the end of the day, you know, I wrote in my first book about the 2004 Red Sox, it's better to win ugly than to lose pretty. Especially I think in the professional era, but I think it's always been the case. And I just did a book on the 1981 Springbok tour to the US, but it had a chapter on New Zealand. Most of those games weren't pretty and free flowing. And in fact, sort of dig and drive rugby is the kind of foundation of Springbok rugby anyways. And remember, prior to the professional era, it was South Africa that was kind of the globally dominant team, followed directly by New Zealand. So I mean, in that sense, we have these, just like rugby has this conception of itself as being special for a whole host of reasons that I think tie into this class mindset. I hate to tell anybody here, rugby has the same percentage of pricks that every other sport has. And rugby has the same percentage of good guys and good women that every other sport has. But like
talking about good women, let's go to Erika, right? Would you agree with this, Erika? And I hope so, because you wrote it, that to improve women's rugby, you said 5 things, and we need to improve the marketing and presentation of the game. We need to improve the sports facilities, and we need to include, in your words, the feminine in corporate design. We need to have an all-female supply chain, under 14s, under 16 and 18s. We need to improve the sevens game in universities, and we need to develop women's only training. Yes? Have I got that right?
Yes.
You said those things. Good. So
yes.
I'm glad I've got different Erika. Right. So
yeah.
Just take us now in the next couple of minutes from women's rugby. We talked about some of those issues in men's rugby, about professionalism, about the difference between the beautiful game and the winning game, all that kind of stuff. Is that replicated in women's rugby, do you think? Or is it different?
The matter is that our structure is completely different from the one that I listened to, because you were speaking about the high school, which kind of high school, which kind of public, private, high level, sorry, we don't have these, because sport doesn't pass through school. So if you are a good players or whatever, it's not that you will reach a better school or that you will be called to a university, because unluckily, and I underline 3 times unluckily, our sport, this is the real point of that we have to get better, because our university doesn't have the team of the university. They've got a club that is connected to the university, that is completely different than being proud to have the best players in your university team. Because in our country, this is a passage that misses us. So if you have to be a good player, to be selected for the first division national, you have to be in the right club. This is the matter. So if you are, we've got a big problem in developing the South. We've got incredible boys and girls playing in Sicily. They play in pitches that you could not have even known in your nightmare. So the mindset that came from that children is completely different to the one of the North, that you've got grass pitches and people who are used to take care about every Sunday, and you have to do perhaps 20 kilometers to play, and in Sicily they have to do 300 kilometers to play one match. So these are the theme. So barriers. It's not about schools. Yes, the barriers.
So and then just on the last minute there, is the same focus on winning? Is the game about winning at the elite level, or is it about playing?
Winning is always for everybody the first focus, obviously, but we always speak about enjoying and have the pleasure to play with your teams. And the thing is that we have to advertise rugby in a different way. And for this, I really would like to have the pleasure to speak about the project I'm following now, that is Women's Rugby Land of Freedom. Because, and I've got a slide, if I can share, because this is like the closer of the circle that we spoke about before, about the values, if rugby has got less or more values, if the rugby player has got a different mindset. So Colm, if I can share this slide with you.
Yeah.
Yes, so, okay. No, I could not share the video.
Okay. Well, we if you talk us through it, Erika, because we've only got in our last minute.
Va bene. Va bene. This is the Italian way. So yeah. We spoke about the seven phases of the cube, because I really speak about that rugby is a cube, and people say 7 phases. Cube has got 6 phases. In reality, in my opinion, rugby is a really important resource to develop the 7th phase. Because for me, the phases of rugby, and when we speak about our mindset, is speaking about being team-oriented. What we teach our children when you go on the pitch, to be team-oriented, to be committed, to have empathy, to have respect, and to be affectionate, and to have the courage and ready to the challenge. So what the world needs now is what I call the 7th phase of the cube, that is the flash of brilliance. So our sport is a situational sport. So we teach our children to react exactly what they see in front in the pitch. That is the same thing that we need in life. In this moment, our world needs a new behavior, a new attitude toward what we have to solve any day. And so the fact of being reactive and sure and be to have a strong self-esteem, that make you keep the responsibility to take and bring decision. And for this, when I was listening to all our opinions about mindset and about values, this is what sport teach, yes. But rugby is a tough sport and really train us to be ready to take decision. And this is an international mindset, because Women's Rugby Land of Freedom, that is the project that I'm following, it interviews women from all over the world. And this is for us a way of advertising that behind the sport, there is what you teach and what is based, the base of the sport. That is our attitude to face life.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a brilliant point. And it echoes, thank you very much for that, Erika, because that does complete the circle. Because if we think back to what Marcus Horan was talking about, player development, and you talk about Chris Patterson talking about players developing skills, and AJ Baxter and Jeremy talking about not shouting at people, but empowering them. That all comes back, I think, to this focus on being the right person. And I totally agree with Chuck and Tony. When I'm suspicious of any sport being good or bad, it's the people who run the sport that are good or bad. If you get the right coaches and the people with the right values, we can transmit them. Of course, rugby teaches you teamwork. You can't score a try without teamwork, but so does football. So does a 4x1 100 meters relay, passing the baton around. You've got to work. However, you can be have bad coaches with the wrong values and get bad outcomes. But if you've got the right coaches with the right values, you'll get good outcomes. So whether that's in the amateur game or the professional game, get the right people in it and the game will develop and prosper. Listen, our time is up. Thank you very, very much, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you for your contributions that you've made. Everyone was absolutely spot on. So thank you once again. And Tony has memorized page 502, and he's going to remember it as his prayer each evening. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, and we move on to the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Ciao.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thanks. It was fun. Bye-bye.